Hey, everybody, and welcome back to GameDive for our 13th official installment. GameDive is the gaming conversation show where we discuss one game each episode and give our thoughts and opinions. I'm Perry, and joining me for today's conversation is Cam
Hey guys.
and Evan.
Hey.
So, today's episode, we're looking at the first and, as of this recording, only game released by Team Cherry, the Metroidvania style action adventure platformer Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight was released on February 24th of 2017 on PC only after a pretty successful Kickstarter campaign. The game was later ported to Switch, where it took off like crazy before also being ported to Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Quick, big shout out to PlayStation Plus for handing this out for free. The game has reportedly sold 2.8 million copies as of February of 2019, and I imagine quite a lot more since then. Now, this goes for pretty much every episode of Game Dive, but I highly recommend that you play Hollow Knight before you listen to this podcast. And Cam, if you would, hit us with that good rundown of what the game is.
Sure. In Hollow Knight, you explore the ruins of Hallownest, an old and decaying kingdom. Variable inhabitants of bugs and beasts have all but died or been taken by a sickness that infects their minds. Not knowing what awaits you below the surface, you dive into the dark tunnels of Hallownest to uncover the secrets of its rise and ruin. Now, Hollow Knight can justly be described as a Retrovania. True to its roots, it's a 2D action adventure game where you move between rooms, defeating enemies, collecting power ups, eagerly awaiting the next boss fight. What makes Hollow Knight so different and unique is it's worth its weight when it comes to its incredible visuals, detailed soundscape, and it's all paired with some of the tightest controls I've ever experienced in gaming. And somehow to top that all off, it was only made by 3 people.
I think that might be the most impressive part about the whole
Yeah.
thing. Just a quick note, I think it's really speaks to the quality of the game, like that it became so popular and did so well. It came out so February 24th of 2017 is literally 2 weeks before the Nintendo Switch comes out, and Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So it was up against
Some
some
titans.
big players here, yeah, and despite that, here we are talking about it, and it's a much beloved game, as we all know, by many.
Yeah, I mean, it without being told so, you would assume that this was created by a large team with a large budget over many, many years, uh, with how it turned out and with how people remember it still.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think a big part of what makes it so enjoyable, and like Cam mentioned a bit, was the controls and the way that the knight, the character you control, feels to move around is like very tight, as a lot of people say, or very responsive. So I think you told me earlier, Evan, like there's no acceleration or deceleration on movements. So you hit left on your D-pad or your control stick, and you go left only as much as you push the stick. Control over your jumps is very precise, like with how long you hold down the button. So short hops are a very easy thing to do because as soon as you let go of the jump button, your character instantly starts to move downward.
Yeah, everything's uber responsive. The sword, the spells, like everything just feels so quick and tidy. The wall jumping is some of the easiest and most fluid of all time, which makes some of the platforming section just an absolute dream to play through.
Yeah, and even on top of that, just all the movement abilities that you acquire over the game really sort of adds to just how you can get through the environments. Like, whether it's intentional or not that you need certain things before you can progress certain places, but also just like your own expression, like as a player, being able to dash around, like hop through platforms and halls and around enemies, like it really makes the game feel like super fluid to play.
And an interesting note I'd like to add to that is like the power ups I mentioned that you can find in every Metroidvania style game where you progress by essentially getting power ups that allow you to access different areas of the map, defeat different bosses, and play in different ways. A lot of that in this game seemed tied to directly to movement. Like you do get sword upgrades known as the nail, so nail upgrades that make your attacks do more damage. But I find that the greatest way that you overcome previous enemies is you have so much more options of movement. Now, whether that's having the dash, having the double jump, the ability to move freely around the environment to attack enemies feels like the biggest power up in the entire game.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely in a lot of Metroidvanias, especially Metroid itself, you're right. Like in the past, it is gates that are blocked by weapon enhancements a lot of the time. But one of the things you can get is the charms, right? So while there isn't many weapon enhancements, aside from some nail upgrades for a bit more damage per hit, there are some charms that give you greater range or a higher frequency of being able to attack in the first place. So I think the charm, if you would, of the charm system is that it allows player expression again, where players can choose from like I can't remember exactly how many there are in the game, but like 20, 30 different charms, all of which will give a different perk or ability. And so if a character or a player does want higher damage or being able to attack faster, then they can choose to put that there, but that won't gate off parts of the game. And a player who is still using the base nail with no upgrades theoretically can still beat the game as well as another player as long as they have the movement options to get through the game.
What's actually really interesting on that, kind of touching on the different play styles you can have, is one is, I guess you could call it like a shaman build, where you put all your charms on that increase like your damage, your soul collection, stuff like that. So in speedrun specifically, they don't actually take the time to get any nail damage upgrades. All they do is they find the upgrades for your basic projectile blast move, and then put on charms that increase the amount of soul you gain, and they beat the entire game without really swinging their nail for damage.
Really? I didn't
Yeah,
know
they
that.
swing the nail just to build soul, and then their projectile attack does a ton of damage.
Well, it's interesting how they kind of allow for those different play styles, if you will. Um, and what I think is great about the charms is that it's kind of a way of upgrading your character that is like divorced from like leveling up, like experience. And that's kind of how Metroidvanias work in general. It's like the power ups you find
Hmm.
are kind of your level ups.
And not choosing like a skill path or tree,
Yeah,
right?
you're not bogged down to like one tree, and like you don't have to respec if you don't like what you did. What's great about the charms is like if you want to swap it out for a certain encounter or for whatever reason, you can mix and match them as you see
Hmm.
fit.
Yeah, and we should point out too that the charm system basically works by you have a set amount of slots that you can fill up, and throughout the game you can increase that space, but you can buy these charms and slot them in, and as long as you have the space and as I learned recently, even if you don't have the space, you can add those in. So it's interesting that it's not based on experience, literal XP or anything else. It's as long as you have the money, the geo in the game to buy these upgrades, you can get as many as you want or as few as you want.
And it takes away like a grindy element to the game, and that's
Absolutely.
something that I really like about Hollow Knight, is just constantly the good part of the game. You're never taking breaks from the game to like go and like grind minions or stuff like that, unless you feel
Unless you
like you
need
really need to
emotional
make some
breaks.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you need emotional breaks.
Which are important, as we know.
But like if you want to find or be able to equip more charms, go explore and go find the secrets, right? Go find hidden items and stuff like that. And that's always been part of like the magic and mysticism surrounding like Metroid games, right? Is the hidden passages and the hidden secrets that littered around the map.
Yeah, and that's something else too is a lot of people tend to talk about how older games wouldn't hold your hand with a lot of secrets in the game. So, if there was a fake wall that you'd have to get through to find a little hidden part of the game, it was usually marked or there was some suggestion that there was a way to get through it. But this is the
Hmm.
first game I played in a really, really long time. Any modern game that I can think of that didn't. That the amount of times that I passed hit or fake walls or hidden areas that I never knew they were there until Cam mentioned it passingly. was ridiculous. And I did find some myself, obviously, throughout my playthrough, but it made it feel more secret. And there's clearly a reason why developers used to do this, because, it might feel like a waste of development these days to spend so much time creating content that a lot of players may not see ever in their playthrough. But once you do, you sort of get this sense of, wow, like I really found something, it's something that someone else may not have seen. And it even goes the other way, like, wow, I never found that. That's crazy. Like, I can't believe there's that much more to the game.
Yeah. Well, I always loved how willing this game, Hollow Knight, is to reward the player for exploring and looking for these secrets. Because, you have fake walls, you have, certain areas that aren't accessible right away, and you need to come back at a later time with a certain power up to come back. Um, and the things we're talking about that you find as secrets, it's not just power ups, it's not just money, it's just not unique items. You can find unique NPCs that give you more lore about the world or have unique items that they sell to you. You can find unique bosses that you can't find anywhere else, and also entirely new areas. So like the game is absolutely willing to explore, like reward the player for looking around for everything, and I think that's a big part of
Hmm.
what makes that so fun.
I think another important part of that too is that sort of infamously, the game has 112% total completion. So I think one idea there is that having significantly more content in the game than is required to beat it allows for that sort of extra bit that you can throw in that a lot of people won't see, or because it is genuinely extra. It's a nice little bonus to your playthrough when you find these things.
I remember I found the hive completely on a whim. I was wandering around in that bit between the kingdom's edge and I think the sewers, and I just randomly threw out a vengeful spirit and it broke a wall and the hive was inside. Like a whole area with like a boss and everything. I found completely because I just like missed a button input.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just
I
like
think I know the area you're talking about. And I think quickly, what's interesting about that little secret there is they kind of put a couple of little like bees in the way, like right next to the hidden walls, kind of in a way where you may accidentally find it. And the way I found it was also by accident because I went to swipe at one of those bees and I like accidentally hit the wall and I noticed that it like crumbled or whatever.
it's totally intelligent because that's the only area in the entire game where you find bees at the front of the hive and at the back of the hive, which you can't that's not where you access the hive from, but you can still see that, okay, there's bees here as well, and there's like a hive-like structure, so there's got to be something there, right? There's a
Yeah,
lot
very
of clues
intentional
that the
design.
developer, yeah, a lot of intentional things that the developer keeps in the game to give you these, it doesn't outright just put a sign in the ground and say this way to so and so, right? It's a lot of
Yeah.
subtle clues and hints that, even if you're not smart for figuring it out, it makes you feel smart.
Yeah, and I know that the developers have talked about previously sort of that idea as well when designing the map, because in a lot of games, the map gives away a lot of stuff, a lot of content in the game. You can have in-game maps that, you get it and it just instantly dumps every icon, every area on you instantly. And it's, then up to you to just go through as a checklist and just get through it all. And then the opposite, where some games barely give you anything to go on in a way that makes it sort of a negative aspect. But with Hollow Knight, they seem to have this great balance where they give you just enough to sort of push you towards things and to like give you interest into looking at something or exploring an area, or going somewhere you haven't before because maybe there's something in that direction, but without just putting it on a map or putting a sign there. And one of the few things that they said they did put were signs for like the stag stations, which are fast travel points you can find throughout the world. So they will give a little bit of hints and pushes for certain things, but for most of it, it's very up to the player to become interested in something they've seen or something they think might be there, and then going on their own to explore it.
Yeah. The map, you have to purchase maps from Cornifer, and you have to find him in each area of the game in order to unlock kind of the basic map. Or, you can go to the map shop if you miss him, but it kind of just gives you like a sort of a framework of the area like to work with, which is not mapped out the entirety of it. And the interesting thing, like Metroidvanias, as you travel to new areas, your character will, update the map with what you've seen. And there are a lot of parts on the map. When you look at the overarching map, you'll be able to see, if you look around, like areas that look kind of incomplete, that will kind of like pique your curiosity and be like, oh, well, maybe I missed something over there. Like, there's certain doors that are closed the first time you come to them, so maybe you come back with a key or some kind of new power up. And I think that's really great how they do that. Here's a question though. How do we feel about the Wayward Compass charm? So that's the one that actually shows where your character is on the map. And that being, you don't have to have it equipped by any means. In fact, you don't even have to buy it in the first place.
I like it because it kind of rewards players who choose not to use it by allowing them to free up a slot for a different charm. Because, why force someone to use a compass if they don't need it or if they don't want to use it? But then players that do need it, it's a cheap upgrade or a cheap charm, takes up one slot. So there's not much of a downside to keeping it on. But there's a few times where it's like I'm trying to fight a hard boss and I don't need to know where I am because I'm going over the same couple rooms over and over because I keep dying. So I'll take it out and put something better in for it.
Yeah. Well, I guess the question is, what benefit does Hollow Knight have by making it so that it's not mandatory? Like a Metroid game where the map is just a feature of the game that your character
I
has by
think that in
default.
itself is just the choice of having it, right? Is, ooh, I need one more space to fit in like this range upgrade. Do I take the range upgrade, or do I put in the thing that's going to help me navigate the environment a little better, right?
Yeah.
It's like a cause, or sorry, you're just weighing the different options. And I feel like there's a lot of like, it doesn't really change your play style, but I think it just makes you think about what you weigh more heavily with.
Yeah, in a way, like you said, they could have just left it as part of the map, like part of the map system, and it would never have been something that the player has to think about. But I think the more choice given to the player, this is a problem that they must solve. Do they want to use it or not? What are the benefits? What are the weaknesses of it? And the more that a developer can do that for a player, the more engaged the player will be most of the time, I think. It's taking something that no one has thought about for years, or, it's not something most people would consider in development,
It's kind of a
changing how
throwaway
the
now.
compass works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So take that part of game design and turn it into something more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that it does, maybe by intention, maybe not, is if you can't see your character on the map, then often there's not as much reason to look at the map. And this is kind of a good way to make it so the player's not always looking at the map rather than, the environment and the visuals of the game.
Yeah, you can base your memory exploration off the actual spaces you're going through instead of just, looking at a map and saying, okay, I need to get through 3 rooms, go up, go right, and there I am.
It's also like a sense of gratitude thing that I experienced where when you have it on, like, you don't even think about it, but then when you take it off, you go, "Holy crap, where am I?"
Yeah,
Sometimes.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's the same thing with how the game makes you buy the quill so that you can update Cornifer's maps on your own. And without that, you only have the base layout of the area that Cornifer has explored and decided to map himself, which I think is a really cool addition, right? Because without it, you kind of have just like the scribbles that Cornifer did, and then you finally buy it, and you're like, oh my gosh, now the map is so much more detailed and
Hmm.
useful.
Yeah, I never realized that the base map was based off what Cornifer would have explored himself. That's some depth to the system that adds to the sort of believability in the lore of the game that I never realized before.
Yeah. Well, Cornifer also creates kind of an interesting objective for each new area that you come into. Is you'll come in, and often for me, one of the first questions was, okay, how do I find this guy? Because I need to know where I'm
Oh
going.
God, where's the map?
Yeah, I'm lost and I can't find my way. Um, which, yeah, it's interesting that that's kind of something that you have to be thinking about and trying to
Mhm.
find. And then, they help you by he leaves a paper trail, literally, of pages, and you can hear him humming along, so you can kind of try to like locate him that way, which is cool.
They have that oh god moment when you finally hear him humming, like, thanks be to
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, I think when I mentioned before that the game doesn't tell you inherently a lot of stuff, they do use other means. Like you said, like they have a couple little visual cues there with the papers laying around when you get really close to them, but also audio cues for a lot of things. So you'll hear something long before you see it on screen. And that could be for enemies, new areas, Cornifer, a few other NPCs in the game. But I think the audio cues and the audio design in general of the game is like masterfully done.
How so?
uh,
Expand.
well, basically, I mean, when you take away something, you have to solve the problem through other means, right? So, a lot of cases in games and outside of games, you have a way things have been done for a long time, like the compass. But take that away, and you have to come up with more unique solutions. More roundabout ways to do the same thing that has been done a certain way for a long time. So take away signage and map markers that are given to you by default, and you're playing a game with a fairly small field of view for your screen. So how do you tell a player without a sign, hey, there's something nearby that's very valuable. You should take some time out of wherever you were going to try and find that now. You put an audio cue. And with Cornifer, it's a little like him sitting there humming. So you'll walk into a new area and, whether it'll be right at the beginning of this area or as you walk in a bit farther, you'll start hearing that humming. And it's like, oh, geez, like I need to go look for this now. It's a new task that you have to do. It's not just I looked at the map, I saw where Cornifer was, and I just beeline to it.
It really aids to a very natural method of exploration through all the areas. Is you not having the map right away. And I mean, a lot like the Metroid games didn't give you the map right away, but as soon as you found the map room, you kind of had the whole map. And you kind of figured it all out. But I like that in this game. Not only do you have to find the map, you also have to fill it in by yourself.
Yeah, it's a good way of tracking your own progress through the game as well. So you can know exactly where you've been and where you haven't, which is really
Hmm.
nice.
Yeah, one other audio cue that I actually want to bring up quickly that really was effective for me is in the Crystal Peaks. When you first are introduced to that area, before you can actually go farther through it, there's a bug in there who's mining, and the important thing in this game is most of the bugs outside of the main village and a few NPCs, below the surface, they're all corrupted. So they
Yeah.
were citizens of this land before, and now they're just mindless and they all try to attack you. But this bug's chilling there, doing some mining, and you walk in and you instantly start hearing him humming this little song again. And at one point through my playthrough, I walked in and he wasn't humming anymore. So
Right.
instantly I was concerned, and I go over and he's starting to be affected by this thing that's corrupting the citizens around here. And so that was a really effective way of using that audio cue by taking it away after you'd become used to it.
Well, it's an interesting way of telling that story too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing we should talk about actually is the difficulty of the game, because often it's kind of a, a trope at this point that it's sort of spoken of in relation to Dark Souls a lot, Hollow Knight.
Ugh, I
So
hate that
Which I think is
comparison.
completely
It's so
unfounded.
lazy.
yeah,
Like,
it's
oh, anything's remotely difficult at all. Oh, it's like Dark Souls.
well, I think there are some mechanics in the game that are similar, like the death and currency, having to recover it on your death, and mobs respawning when you die. But in general, yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a fairly lazy way to just label it as a Souls like.
I'll tell you, if
But
this game came out like if Souls came out in like 2006 or something like that, people would have been saying like, "Oh, like Through the Fire and Flames, man. This song is like Dark Souls.
Dark Souls for Guitar Hero, yeah.
Yeah, Guitar Hero 3. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I think you're right. Yeah.
yeah. But I think the difficulty of the game is reminiscent of it, where it ramps up and is punishing, but not just because Dark Souls also did it. It is a style of game. It is a mechanic that's used in a lot of games nowadays. And I think Hollow Knight does it better than Dark Souls does, honestly. I think.
Well, if I may,
Yeah, go
like
ahead.
as someone who's played Dark Souls, I think it does have a lot of similarities to Dark Souls. A lot of the things you mentioned, things, like the currency that you lose on death and then the ability to regain it by reclaiming your soul. That's like pretty much the same mechanic, but not that Dark Souls owns that mechanic by any means. Like, if I'm not mistaken, Diablo 2, at least, I haven't played the first one, had a similar mechanic to that.
Hmm.
But, like kind of the story has like similar tones in Dark Souls and Hollow
Because it's
Knight,
sad.
and yeah, because it's sad. No, with
Please.
people going hollow and kind of death and decay and that sort of thing. But you've got like a hub town with residents that come and go and have their own stories, like in Dark Souls. But where I think Dark Souls and Hollow Knight actually differ a lot is in the difficulty. Funny enough,
Hmm.
because Dark Souls is a game that is very unforgiving right from the get go. And Hollow Knight, in my opinion, is a game that is actually very accessible and very forgiving in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah, right off the bat.
Because right off the bat, you have 5 health. Um, healing doesn't take long, but it is something that you have to kind of weave in between enemies' attacks. Similar to Dark Souls, of course, but Dark Souls gives you a lot less openings and a lot less actual healing. The Estus Flask, when you start, only has 5 charges. Um, but in Hollow Knight, you kind of can infinitely keep refilling your Estus Flask, so to speak,
Hmm.
which I think in a lot of ways makes it a lot more accessible.
Yeah, I think one thing too is that, I mean, like you're saying, it's a lot less punishing off the bat, but later in the game, the difficulty curve does ramp up like significantly. And I think that's a better way of doing it where, for a player who has played countless games, is a pro, doesn't need any hand holding at the beginning, they're not being held back by anything, right? There's no tutorial, there's no, hand holding. They can breeze past all the opening areas with zero downsides to themselves. They could jump past everything, kill anything quickly, and get to the point where they start to get a challenge. Whereas a newer player is able to get in and sort of build up their own skills fighting the simpler enemies with simpler move sets and more predictable attacks. And eventually they'll overcome that and then get to a new area with slightly more difficult things or more obstacles. And, it really sort of naturally allows growth in a player's skill over the course of the game. And I mean, for example, like
Mm.
I am not the type of player that would typically play a action platformer. My platforming skills are next to zero, and I'm not particularly good at bullet time and very mechanically intensive games. So this game, from the first 10 minutes, I was engrossed in it, and I didn't find that I was being punished for just trying to play the game off the bat. I mean, later I clearly, it starts beating you with get better at the game, but for a while you can cruise through it pretty well without starting to have to actually significantly improve. But yeah, I think it's just a lot more accessible off the bat, and it still has that end game of crazy difficult, mechanically intensive, what the hell am I looking at type of gameplay.
Well, I also think that Hollow Knight, it kind of forces the player to evolve in its skill in a way that is not really accessible in Dark Souls, because Dark Souls, your movement is limited to essentially just dodge rolling, and you can parry attacks and stuff. But in Hollow Knight, you can jump, you can double jump, you can dash. Eventually, at a point, you get a dash that can allows you to pass through enemy hitboxes without taking damage. I think that this allows for the combat and the other parts of the game to kind of evolve in difficulty more naturally, because these are all, movement tools that kind of flow into each other and feel natural, whereas it's more difficult to kind of put those concepts to a 3D game like Dark Souls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think in a way too, the difference between 2D and 3D gaming, Dark Souls can be more difficult because it's in 3 dimensions. You have to consider another dimension of your play area. And that could,
Yeah, you have to control a camera.
yeah. And with Hollow Knight, you're only worrying about up, down, left, right. So I think that adds a bit more simplicity in how you have to think about what you're doing at any given time. And not to say that it is inherently simple, but just that it lightens the load of what a player has to deal with.
Well, it's interesting because I find that simplistic concepts allow for them to be flushed out further. Whereas, like you say, adding a whole nother dimension makes a lot of things more complex. But I think it limits a lot of other things in the way that you can't, like, as a player, you can't comprehend certain things, right? Like if you were to try to add like a big dash in Dark
Well, yeah,
Souls like you
imagine the
have in
movement in
Hollow
Hollow
Knight,
Knight in Dark Souls.
yeah, you just wouldn't be able to keep track of what the hell you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah, it would be a very different game. Like, it would be more like Devil May Cry, which is a game where, you can dash and jump around and do all that crazy stuff. But in Dark Souls, you can, run and roll and barely jump. Like, you can't jump like on command. So,
And block. That's the big difference. You can't
oh,
block in Hollow Knight,
right,
but you can block in
right,
Dark
right.
Souls.
But, you really don't need to block in Hollow Knight, I think, once you get into the mechanics and how it
Well,
actually
but I think
works.
that's the thing is it's designed around the lack of a blocking option, right?
Yeah.
Your way to avoid damage is to dodge attacks, not just sit there and press a button.
Or you can try and parry them and just be like a giga brain Chad.
Yeah.
uh,
I don't know if that's it always struck me as kind of like a random chance when parries happen in Hollow Knight. Like
yeah.
it wasn't something I was ever actively trying for.
Same, but I tried it once against one of the bosses. It's like it's fairly reliable. Like if you had the read on a boss and you could see all their attacks coming, there's a lot of attacks that you can parry fairly easily. But again, you have to have the read on that boss. You have to know what their wind up animations are and what attacks coming and what timing it comes with.
And see green code running down the screen at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the other thing is like what advantage do you gain from parrying in Hollow Knight? It's not much, honestly, because you
Well, you
are
can stay on the
also
attack.
Basically, yeah.
yeah. I mean, if it's a choice between dodging and getting hit or like parrying to avoid the hit, then that's the benefit there for sure. But often I found the few times I did parry by accident was detrimental because it also sends your character or makes them pause like in midair or
Like a bit of hit
whatever.
stun almost.
Or
Oh,
it pushes you backwards if you don't have the one charm on.
Yeah.
Which during some of the fights can be, like you say, pretty detrimental because there's a lot of fights where the margins to dodging attacks is pretty slim and they can appear on both sides of your character. So if you hit the guy, and you can, this happens all the time, you'll hit an enemy and it'll push you back off a ledge or into
Hmm.
another enemy. Happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, I know one of the things the developers had said previously was that in terms of the movement and combat of the game, that they wanted to design it in a way that the player felt like if they got hit by something, they could have dodged it up until the frame that it hit them.
Mm,
yeah, which I think holds true. I think the tightness of the controls really allows for so much like improvisation in the midst of fights.
Yeah.
Like if you have the reaction time, a lot of the time you can like short hop and then like quickly dash out of something you weren't expecting, or uh, you know full hop over something, or there's like all
yeah.
kinds of like different moves that you can pull really with such a simple set like move set, which is
Yeah.
I think really impressive.
Yeah, it's all down to there being like zero wind up on anything. The dash, as soon as you pull the trigger, it just happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know in speedrunning circles too, they use the energy blast that your character has for that backwards kick to get to platforms that you wouldn't be able to early on in the game. So I'm not sure if that was an intended feature or not, whether the devs were at least aware of it.
Man, I've seen some of the speedruns. There's no way the devs intended for some of the stuff that these guys do.
Yeah,
It's
but I
just
also watched the
so
Path of
next.
Pain hitless speedrun, and there's no way the devs could have intended that, but here we are, so.
True enough. Well, at least with that one, you're at least playing by the rules. I mean, you're making the
There are
rules your
hard no
bitch, but
rules in
still.
the path of pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone's ever watched like crazy Mario Maker levels where it's like you can't touch anything the entire time, that's kind of what it looks like.
It's actually just ridiculous. And it was, in fact, a reaction from the devs because there's a similar platforming segment that the community said, "Oh, this is like too easy" or whatever. So the developers put in this crazy, ridiculous platforming segment that's totally optional, but is just next level insane.
Well, and I mean, on that note, like, I think I don't know if people were talking about the White Palace specifically being like too easy. I can't imagine that was the case, but I do find that often the platforming in this game takes a back seat to the combat, which I don't think is a bad thing necessarily. So it could just be that they were trying to add more of a pure platforming experience in there for people who are looking for that.
I think so. The game, like there are some bosses and enemies that platforming intertwines itself very nicely with, especially certain flying enemies that will fly away from you that you have to wall jump on the same wall and then jump off to try to hit them, or double jump and hit them, dash hit them, whatever you have to do. And I think that adds a lot to the combat. But you're right, most of the difficult platforming segments are very detached from the rest of the actual game.
Yeah. I think the Colosseum has quite a few good segments that really blend the platforming and the combat together really nicely. They put you in
Beautifully,
a lot
yeah.
of very precarious situations, some with platforms, some without, some with only walls, which definitely shake up the combat in really interesting ways.
Well, even so, there are other sections of the game that lead to sort of bonus areas, I guess. But one of which is there's that one hallway, and I think it's in the green path where you have to, how would you even call it, like
Sword
pogo?
bounce.
Yeah, sword bounce on top of like shelled flying beetles across this large hall full of spikes so you can't drop. And for half of it, you can't even touch like the ceiling or walls. So they do, like, it's not just that the difficult platforming sections are completely optional. Like, you never have to look at it if unless you go way, way, way out of your way to do it. Like, a lot of them are on the regular beaten path that you would come across throughout a regular playthrough. And you wouldn't realize until you get to the other side that, I probably shouldn't have spent 2 hours trying to get across that.
But I think that's part of the magic of the game is getting stuck on something, getting through it, and whether or not the reward is worth it or not is kind of up to you.
And the real reward was the tears you shed along the way.
One thing I think would be really good to talk about is like the world design, because I think they've done a lot to, well, so one of the kind of hallmarks of a Metroidvania style game is kind of a world design that often loops back on itself, has lots of shortcuts that are opened along the way, and has ease of movement between areas. Um,
And a lot of different
and this game,
segments as well.
yeah, different area, lots of different areas that, yeah, have their own secrets and kind of connect in a certain way. And Hollow Knight is no exception, certainly. The first probably hour or two, well, a couple hours of the game, couple areas of the game are pretty linear in how you approach it. But probably around the time that you get to the City of Tears, things really start to like branch out and open up. And interestingly, about the City of Tears, there's actually at least more than one way to get there. In fact, for whatever reason, I didn't take the normal path to get there, which is in the fungal wastes. You'll see Hornet kind of dash across this big open ledge or open acid pit, which you can't follow, obviously, because you don't have the super dash at the time. What most people do, most normal, smart, functioning human beings would do would be to climb up the ledge right above that and hop across the thorny kind of maze above there to get to the City of Tears. For whatever reason, my brain wasn't working at the time. So I went down to the Mantis Village, beat the Mantis Lords, went through Deep Nest, and you can actually get to the City of Tears by finding the tram pass in the failed tramway, taking the tram to the ancient abyss or whatever it's called, and then
Ancient
coming
Basin.
up ancient basin, yeah, and then coming up from the tramway into the City of Tears, which is how I thought you were supposed to do it.
So you took the most roundabout, difficult possible way to get to City of
But
Tears.
yes, but it worked.
Yes.
It's really funny because I did something similar where I went to Deep Nest before the City of Tears. I dropped down through like the crumbling ground into this crazy, scary area that I was not prepared for in the least. But I actually ended up climbing out up to Green Path and then out instead of actually finding the tram and getting across to it and then enter the City of Tears in the normal way I suppose you're supposed to do it. But that's what I
Yeah.
love about this game. It's like you can hardly even call it, I mean, I guess you could call it the normal way, but the order in which you do things after you beat, I guess, the green path is sort of up to whatever you end up stumbling upon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
For,
absolutely.
for example, like in order to beat the game at the bare minimum requirements, like all you have to do is beat the three dreamers. But I went all the way out into the kingdom's edge and got down into the abyss and saw the lake of void like before I beat the game or even killed all the dreamers, which is like I guess not the way they intended it to because there's no requirement to get all the way out there.
Well, because that's a DLC area, right?
The kingdom's edge isn't, no, it's just part of the game.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I don't think there are any DLC areas, truly, except for the God Home, but that's not on the main map. But in terms of what they intended, like what the intended path was, I mean, I'm sure, I think, both mine and your experience was intended, truly, like for people that, take whatever path they can find, really,
Yeah,
not
that goes the
necessarily.
same way. Like there is a suggestion of what you could do.
Yeah, whether or not it's the path most traveled or not doesn't mean it's less valid.
Yeah, so I mean the little cutscene there with Hornet flying past, like that is clearly meant as like a little like sort of guidepost for you to be like, oh, I should figure out how to get where this character got. But then like you could have just been like, nah, and went
Well,
somewhere else.
I looked at that and I was like, oh, I need the super dash.
Yeah.
And, for whatever reason, it did occur to me that I could just climb up above. I was like, oh, nope, this is super dash. I'm out.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you just, and that's kind of the nature of Metroidvanias, right? You're playing along and then something comes up and you're like, I'm probably just not ready for that right now. I'll come back later.
But it's
But
not a
sometimes you're
mistake.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, I missed saving Zote the second time because I thought I wasn't able to get to him, which was not true. You can actually get to save him as soon as you get there. Like you don't need any special power ups. It's just a hidden wall.
Hmm.
So sometimes that can kind of lead you astray, like expecting that you need more than you have. But I suppose it's just the nature of Metroidvanias. I'm not sure if there's really a way around that. Because you don't want to put in markers that say clearly, oh, you need this ability for this part. You need this ability to get past this, right?
No, because
Like I
it
think
ruins your immersion, right? It ruins your exploration in your adventure.
Yeah, I mean, there were plenty of times too where it's like you get halfway through an area and then it's like there's some kind of environmental uh feature that it's like clearly you had enough to get to where you are now, but there is some other ability you need to get past there.
hmm
So there,
Especially when you're down to the base abilities of maybe you have just a single jump and the dash, where it's like very clear that there's no way with my current tools I can make it up there.
yeah. So it's not to say that the devs allowed you to go anywhere, anytime, like as long as you were big brain enough to figure it out. Like there are still like environmental blocks and ways to funnel the player like in certain directions, but they do make it feel a lot more natural and a lot less punishing or just blatant than it is
hmm
on a lot of other things.
A lot of game developers talk about like creating a world for players to explore. But in a lot of 3D like open world games, I find that you don't really explore it on your own. You kind of follow the trail of breadcrumbs that the dev leaves behind for you. I feel like
Yeah.
in this game, you truly feel like you're exploring and finding things on your own volition. It's not the dev like pulling open the curtains and saying "ta-da." It's you actually by your own merits finding things and exploring.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely had that sense a lot of my playthrough in this.
Yeah. I think that a lot of that goes back to the map system, like we were talking about. It's just, you go to new areas and it gets updated on your map because you went there, you found it. Like that's completely on you. And and even like missing areas, like most people will. Obviously, there's tons of stuff to see in the game, and you can't possibly find it all by yourself. Like I by total accident missed the entrance to like where you get the mark of the king, where the worm's carcass is. And I mean, it's not that that was hidden necessarily. It's just that it was, one path out of several that I just managed to miss somehow.
Yeah, you went left when you should have went up.
Yeah.
But going back still, like you're talking about the kind of layout of the world. And I think it really ties into the world design and lore of the game as well. That, it's a Metroidvania. The way those are designed are typically like tunneling hallways, different areas, sections, rooms, and you know the devs have said that to them that kind of felt like an ant's nest, right? And the connection between this bug world and that was all, like natural. So I think the lore of the game and the universe they've built around it really like supports the gameplay in a way, because throughout the entire time it is absolutely believable that these winding branching pathways are this bug society, civilization that's long since collapsed, and you're traveling deeper and deeper underground and just discovering, at the deepest places, like the most crazy and scary things, and, at the highest peaks, like some crazy crystals and, monuments to old gods. And so I think the game in and of itself mechanically is great. It's perfectly 10 out of 10 as far as I'm concerned. But the lore and world they built around it really pushes it to something else.
11 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, yeah, as you're saying, the whole like bug nest thing being underground, it's like perfectly analogous for this type of game.
Hmm.
And I mean, yeah, most of the world is underground, truly, much like a bug's nest would be, or an ant nest in any case.
And the other thing too is they a lot of the times in media you have to have a level of suspension of disbelief to believe that what you're viewing or experiencing is real, that this is something that could happen, or you're not taken out of the experience by thinking like, why is this a thing? Like, this is so unrealistic.
As long as it adheres to its own logic, right?
Right. And I think that the way they design this world is like the epitome of that. Like, speaking of the City of Tears, this is a huge, like, ruined metropolis that is deep in the middle of this like spanning labyrinth underground, and yet it's raining. And so, they don't say like there's no blatant why is it raining, like, or they point out, hey, it's raining. It's just it is raining. So you're left to consider that yourself. And then later you'll find out that there's an underground lake above it in the world, in the game. And so the logic there is that the water in this lake has been leaking through the ceiling of the City of Tears, and that's the rain you're seeing. So there's this level of logic to a lot of the design choices in the game that tie it together and make it believable in this world.
And it's a lot of subtleties. It's a lot of things where the developers don't treat you like you're an idiot. right? It's like that's something that you can see, and if you really thought about it, you could figure it out. There's no like dialogue with some no name random like village goer that says, "Oh yeah, like it rains in the city of tears because the lake of like the cavern's cracked and the lake above is now dripping below," right?
Yeah.
The amount of story that they can portray just through visual is really impressive.
And even just subtle like things you'll come across throughout the game. There's a bunch of tablets that will give you sort of these vague, cryptic sort of. They're not hints or anything. They're just statements. But
Hmm.
once you realize, an overarching thing that's happening, you realize that's giving you details about it. Like, for example, the green path, which is this lush, like beautiful, like forested area in one of the first ones you'll discover when you play. No, it's you don't really ever think like, why is it so lush and like amazing down here and everywhere else it's awful. And there's some tablets throughout the thing. And then eventually you figure out that, or you can piece together that it was there's this being in world that dreamed this into reality. That the reason this area is different than everywhere else in this world is because of this dreamer. So it's just little
Right.
reasonings behind different design choices that elevate it.
And I
It's
think
it's not just
that's
green because it's green.
yeah, it's one of the game's I think greatest strengths, and also one of its weaknesses, if I'm honest. And I don't know if it's a true weakness, but a lot of the time I found all the tablets in my first playthrough, and I read them, and they didn't mean anything to me at the time because I didn't understand the world enough. But on my second playthrough, or revisiting them through backtracking, as you tend to do in Metroidvania games, then it finally starts to click that, oh, this is what that means. I finally have some context to it. And for some things like that, it's really a revelation. But there's a lot of things that, like, if you didn't take a quick trip to the wiki article, it's very difficult to actually find out what the dev is trying to portray.
Absolutely. The story in this game is, willfully vague and purposely hidden from the player at pretty much every turn. And in fact, I've even, I got to the true ending, or I guess the vanilla true ending, whereby you defeat the Radiance and, destroy it or whatever the case is. But I did all that, and I didn't realize what the significance of what I was doing was truly, just from what I'd seen in game. And it wasn't until I read on the internet about what the real like backstory from other people that had pieced it together had been.
Hmm.
So I agree. Well, I mean, I agree that that's like both a strength and a weakness. Like in that the strength there is that the how much it mystifies you, how much you want to keep exploring to find what is the truth. But then also the weakness of it maybe being too vague or too hidden. I don't know.
Yeah, I think in terms of that, it feels more, same as what I was saying earlier in the episode, that it feels more rewarding to realize yourself later, even if you didn't realize it at first, what the significance of it all was. Like it's gonna be cool regardless.
It's
These,
about that
you're
payoff.
fighting God in the end, and that's crazy, and it presents itself that way. It just makes it more significant once you realize the overarching story.
And it's kind of it varies the importance and significance of the secrets that you find. Whereas the one that Evan was talking about, how a godlike being dreamed the lushness of the green path and its denizens kind of into the world. While it's cool, it's not necessarily vital to the main story. Where there's some NPCs and lore tablets that you can find throughout the world that actually are central to the game's narrative, that are even more difficult to find than those ones. And sometimes, like Perry said, it can be, or maybe it feels like a detriment, where you can finish the entire game and be like, well, I don't know what happened, right? I don't completely understand how all the pieces fit together. And like naturally you find yourself on a wiki article. And I mean, for some of the story things that I'd understand, finding them out on wiki articles was still like intriguing because it was still a very intriguing story. But I felt like
It would
if
have
they
been nicer
were
to
a
learn it in
little,
game.
yeah, like I look, I totally like it. How it's like Perry said, it's mystical when you find some things and that everything's hidden. It feels very secretive. But at the same time, while actively looking for things, I feel like I missed out on some things by not experiencing them in the game and having to find them online first and then find the secret passages in game after reading about them.
That's true, but did it impact your enjoyment of your original playthrough? Like, did you at any point think by the end, like, wow, this was good, or this could have been better had I known these things, or were you still
Honestly,
enjoying it?
not at all. I loved the game front to back, and then it had a bitching story that got even more flushed out afterwards. Like it just
Yeah.
got better for me. It only got better.
Yeah,
So
so I guess in that case,
like
like, if you feel like you've missed out on something because it wasn't apparent to you or obvious to the player throughout your playthrough and by the end of it, then I guess then yeah, there is an argument to be made that they should have included more obvious story elements or hints or whatever. And I guess that really depends on the type of person playing the game. Because I am on the same side as Cam. It's just like I wasn't aware of a lot of these things, but I still really enjoyed. Like I was never sitting there thinking, "Wow, I wish I knew," or "I wish I was told more about this sooner." It just added
you're
to
right.
my enjoyment.
Well, yeah, I think you're fed enough to feel kind of satisfied, like you have, a certain idea about what's happening or what your role in the story is. So I would agree with that.
It's a fulfilling experience. There's a lot of whys that the player might have by the end of the game, but like Googling and finding out different answers, like it didn't make me feel, oh man, like I missed this and I feel crappy about it. It was like, oh my gosh, I now have to go find that. It made me excited to go and revisit the world.
Yeah, well, I think I have to wonder honestly if it wasn't even part of their intention to drum up conversation, like amongst player base, online, in person, about things that they'd seen, like, and kind of piece things together as a group, as a community. I have to wonder if that was part of the intention.
And it very well might be because this being a smaller indie game made by not a ton of people, I feel like they have that freedom of making things only accessible or understandable to the people who really invest their time in it. And they're not worried about necessarily, of course, they want to be successful, but they're not necessarily worried about what 90% of players are going to, encounter or think about the game. Because if you look at like some of the trophies or achievements, depending on what platform you're on, like, 2% of players get some of them. Barely, barely 80% of players even get the first achievement in most games, right? So I feel like without these constraints of trying to make it as accessible to as many people as possible and just
Doing
making
what
the
they
best
want to
game
do.
and doing what, yeah, exactly, doing what they wanted, they can instill all this detail and wonderful like little notions in there that not everyone's going to find, but if you truly love the game and you're going to find out about it.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think.
I think it's also good that the game itself is so fun to play and so
Yeah,
fun
that
to,
does
fight a
help.
lot of the
Yeah.
enemies and, explore the world, that it's not like a detriment necessarily that you don't know 100% what's going on all the time.
It's true.
So most
And
of the time you're content to just play the game.
I've said this in a couple other episodes, but I don't really like backtracking. It like I'm a busy guy. I've got a life going on. When I have to backtrack to areas, especially do grinding, that kills the game for me. If I have to backtrack to grind things, hate that. But in this game, I never felt like I was annoyingly backtracking through areas. I always felt like I was on the verge of finding something new. Or, when you get the double jump, you go, oh, there's this area in the City of Tears that I think I can double jump up to a new area with, right? And then you're just like searching for something new to discover
Yeah,
constantly.
you're excited to explore in this game. It never feels
Mhm.
like a chore.
Mhm. And it's just like the enjoy, like just the joy of movement in this game is unparalleled in my opinion. It just feels so good to move around this game, especially when you go and get all the upgrades. Going back and forth between like a new save and a finished save is crazy. Like the difference between having only the base
Yeah.
jump and having all the movement, it's like
Yeah,
it feels
yeah.
like two different games.
Well, it's funny, like we've spent about an hour now talking about the world and the exploration, which really goes to show how great it is because we've barely talked about the bosses or enemies at all.
Yeah, you're right.
I
Which is
mean,
a huge part of Metroidvanias.
yeah, and to be fair, like obviously the combat in the game is simple for lack of a better term. Not to say that it's bad, but I think the enemy design in this game is incredible. The bosses especially, but even base enemies that you sort of come across throughout the game are always interesting. Usually bring a new sort of challenge in how they uh enter combat or like go about it. And the exploration is great, but throughout that entire time you're always hitting these enemies and experiencing combat. So it goes to show too that the combat in the game and the enemy design really is as good as the whole exploration and world design as well.
It's incredible to me just how fresh a lot of the enemies can feel. Like some of the enemies move in similar ways to others, but maybe slower or faster in some ways, and their timings are different. But just adding like a new model to them and a new atmosphere, and then those slight changes in gameplay, it really makes them all feel fresh. It didn't feel like you're repetitively fighting the same enemy all the time.
hmm And one of my favorites, the large mushrooms in the fungal wastes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something too in the game is, we talked about how the tone of it is very similar to Dark Souls, but the difference here, I think, is the game still has this contrast of sad, serious, kind of beautiful world with humor in it too, and cute designs, and pleasing art. And these mushroom characters are these comically large with these wide, like blank expressions, and one of their two or three attacks is they just bang their head repeatedly into the ground to try and hit you. And it's hilarious and it looks hilarious. And the developers have said that some of their favorite parts of the game are the parts that add a bit of humor to it. Like, especially the Dung Defender, who I had
Yeah.
a great time when I found that character. And Zote, it's a couple little respites from the depressing world that it
The
exists in.
darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the NPCs are just such an absolute joy in this game and like such a big highlight for me. Like, and as
Hmm.
you were saying, for a game with like such a somber and somewhat existential like tone and backdrop to it, it's absolutely, as you say, like these sparks of kind of joy and light scattered throughout the world that really brings it to life. Like, you'll enter a new area and you hear like Zote grumbling, and you're like, oh, he's that rascal got himself into got himself into
Hey,
trouble
can I
again.
get
Here we
a quick Bafanada, please?
Ah, Papa Nada.
There we go.
Yeah. And exactly. They're all, and even Cornifer with his humming, and the Dung Defender, you can hear him doing his thing before you show up. And you just know,
Yeah.
there's gonna be something charming
Fun.
around the corner,
Yeah.
something, yeah,
It's
something to
shockingly
break things up.
charming despite the tone of it, because everything's underground. Just the atmosphere is very dark and kind of mysterious and evil sounding in a way. And then you'll find like these lighthearted characters sometimes. You think, oh, like, this game's not so bad. And then you'll stumble into a room in the City of Tears, and you'll realize that when they close the gates because of the infection, the denizens turn to cannibalism. And you go, oh, okay, no, this game's fucked
He's like, No, this isn't happy anymore."
up. Yeah. It strikes a very odd balance between the two.
Well, even like along those lines is the music of the game. And I have to say, this is one of my favorite soundtracks in any game I've played in 26 years.
All time.
Yeah, it
Masterpiece.
just absolute masterpiece. It I don't know, it's like the same idea where it's these it's so tonally accurate to the different areas it's in. because each separate, Green Path, City of Tears, Dirt Mouth, Forgotten Crossroads, Fungal Waste, they will all have their own sort of music accompaniment. And depending on the area or the situation, the music will change, and it feels appropriate. Like the music can go from this sort of sense of emptiness in Forgotten Crossroads and like the Ancient Basin to like this grandiose climacticness with like different boss fights. And it can be sad, like in City of Tears. It's all very pretty, but there's this like melancholy to it. Like and Green Path is calm and like kind of
Almost
beautiful.
whimsical.
Yeah, and it's all very accurate to the area it's in, and it's all this like, and it's all incredibly done. Like it is its own thing. I cannot think of another game off the top of my head, at least, that the music sounds very similar to. Like there are definitely you can maybe hear inspiration from classic adventure games in some things, or in somberness from the Dark Souls series, but the tracks themselves all feel unique, which is crazy when you consider it was all done by one guy.
Yeah. Whose work prior to this included Wastelander Panda Exile.
And wasn't there a Pac-Man game or something too? Yeah.
I can't remember, but it truly is incredible. It's a guy who's from the same town. They're from
Yeah,
Adelaide
Christopher
in
Larkin is
Australia.
the guy's name.
Yeah,
So shout
and
out to him.
it's really incredible because like it sounds so professionally well done. Just it's not so. One game that I kind of thought about when I heard that it was like one guy who did the soundtrack for this game, other than I think they credit a viola player and a tenor who sings on the City of Tears track. The one other like soundtrack that I could really think of that was done by one person was like Undertale, and it's totally different from that. Whereas Undertale has this kind of like 8-bit to 64-bit kind of retro synth vibe going on. This feels like full orchestral
Hmm.
soundtrack to it, and
Yeah,
it
the
was
other I
really
could think
stunning to me.
is Stardew Valley, famously done by one guy.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And but it's, and not to say any less of Undertale or Stardew Valley, those are both incredible games. But you can almost see like, okay, like yeah, I can imagine that one guy did this, like given so much time and so much like passion and dedication, I can see one guy doing this.
And
It
obvious
blows
talent
my
too.
mind that Christopher Larkin composed this entire soundtrack.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's really mind blowing.
It's one of the only soundtracks too. Well, I don't want to say only, but there's not a ton of games where I play through it and I'm constantly thinking, "Wow, this is like really fitting or really great music." But like the first time you enter Dirtmouth, the first time you enter the Green Path or the City of Tears, it's like the music is immediately it catches your ear, even though it's in the background and there's still sound effects and soundscape playing over top of it. It somehow it comes above all that and you notice it.
Yeah, it's so evocative. And I mean, I hadn't played Hollow Knight for a few weeks, and then on a whim, I decided to listen to the soundtrack on Spotify. And as soon as the Dirt Mouth track came on, I was like, "Oh boy, here we go again."
Hmm.
Damn.
And it's one of those things too where they loop it in such an intelligent way that it's not just like front to back. Like they have different variations on the themes depending on if you're in combat and other events happening. But I've spent hours in some of the areas, and the tracks don't feel stale. They don't feel old. I'm not
Hmm.
tired of hearing them or annoyed at them. Right?
Well, I've
It's
even had
so
moments where it's like
enjoyable.
I'm playing and I need to take a break for something, or just want to take a break, so I'll just leave it there and I'll keep my headset on. And it'll be there for an hour, and I won't notice the music has just been looping and looping and looping and looping, because obviously it has to. He didn't compose hour-long tracks for every area.
Yep.
um, but a lot of games, especially retro games, which, you know, are a lot of inspiration for Hollow Knight, had looping overworld themes or battle themes or whatnot. And you could always tell, and it would eventually start grating on you, and you'd get sick of it. And I never had that with this game, and I'd have it open for hours or play for hours on end, and like you're saying, it's like I never found myself, like, getting sick of it.
Hmm. I think part of that is due to there's no like Pokemon battle theme or like there's one battle music the entire game, but
Yeah, and in the same vein, the, art direction of the game as well, and the actual animations and illustrations, they are
stunning.
yeah, and also done by one guy. And with those, I was trying to figure out, 'cause I'm into arts myself, and I was trying to figure out, like, if it was genuinely 2D animation that was drawn into the game engine and, done that way, because I couldn't imagine it, like, the amount of variation in different areas or just the amount of different enemies or, little set dressings throughout any given scene. There was so much detail. And I looked it up and it turned out that, yeah, the guy sketched everything by hand, scanned it in, traced over it, and then animated it like frame by frame.
Yeah.
And, it's not to say that the entire game is done that way. There is a mix of, different lighting and volumetrics and particle effects to accent the animations and character designs. But, just the fact, the art in this game is beautiful as, equivalent to the music.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not all like Cuphead level frames of animation, but it's still everything is
Yeah.
gorgeous and
Yeah.
lively.
I mean, I have to say for like a 2D platformer for a 2D game, like the amount of depth like that's given to the world just through like the parallax scrolling and the backgrounds, like the lighting effects and the shading, like the environmental fog and that kind of stuff. It
Hmm.
really like brings the scenes to life in a way that we don't really see in a lot of 2D games. I think it's really quite impressive.
There's almost like there's too many examples of it to really go over. But like, even from the beginning of the game, when you drop down from the Howling Cliffs and you find your way into Dirtmouth and you find the entrance to the well, right? And you see there's a light above it and the light like cascading into the depths and darkness below. It's like
Hmm.
every area in the game seems to have really detailed and inviting areas like that, or not inviting areas, maybe disgusting areas,
But they all seem to have
it's
life.
mm,
Uh,
nothing
Well,
is like
and not only that, but each area has its own environment, like its own aesthetic, its own
yeah, they don't
textures,
get
its
to
own
just copy
enemies.
paste throughout the whole
Yeah,
game.
yeah, and it's like just so impressive, and like the way that the areas kind of bleed into one another. So like, rooms that are kind of the terminal between two areas will kind of start to fade into the style of the next area.
Yeah, there's almost a gradient between them.
Yeah. And again, for like such a small team working on this game, it's like incredible to see
it's
that level of
mind-boggling.
detail.
So if you haven't queued in already, we like this game.
Yeah,
It's pretty good. It's a
Yeah,
good
it's
game.
it's above
there's
average.
more detail and love gone into this game than there is in like most AAA games that I've ever played. And I mean, like again, difference between adding assets and things into a 3D open world game and a 2D side scrolling game. Like I get the difference, but still, this game is fantastic. And one thing that's like in keeping with the theme of the game is the bosses. The bosses always seem to hit the mark. I mean, a lot of them can be kind of goofy, but so many of them are like really epic and difficult to take down. Even before you hit the end of the game, there's bosses that'll give you trouble. But man, once you beat the like the I don't know if you want to call it the non-true ending or the false ending where you just beat the Hollow Knight and then you go further and then you go and you face the Radiance. Just the like the scale of what it feels like you're doing is so incredible, and the boss fight itself is got amazing animation and some really tough parts. It's just everything looks beautiful, plays beautiful too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good sense of pacing from the first boss, the false knight, to the radiance. The False Knight is pretty easy, truly. Of course, obviously it's the first boss. But even he seems quite substantial when you first see him. You're like, oh, this is gonna be like the first like properly difficult enemy that you've fought, and it will be at that point in the game. All the way up to the Radiance, which is quite difficult. It starts to do 2 hearts of damage per hit, and but by that point you're outfitted with tons of charms. How many nail upgrades, several extra masks. So they do a great job of of really building you up alongside the bosses as you go along.
Yeah, and some of them are optional, right? For example, the Mantis Lords. If you try to fight the Mantis Lords without like any upgrades, literally just a dash and the level 1 nail, like that shit's tough. It takes so many hits and you got to be consistent for a long time. But then you're able to realize, okay, I'm going to go back out into the world and I'm going to come back when I'm strong. I'm going to kick these guys' asses.
Now, if you play the game under the pretense that the Mantis Lords are the only way to progress, then, like I did,
And me.
then that's what you got to do.
You got you got
That's
to
the
do.
way it is.
Well, even some of the bosses still like you mentioned, the Radiance is clearly a crowning moment of the game, and the design really reflects that. But like you're saying, like there's this random sort of middle bosses throughout the whole experience that really are well designed and properly interesting in terms of the actual fights.
Hmm.
Well, a
And
lot of them
like,
fit into the lore of the world.
The
right,
dream
yeah, I mean,
is wholly connected to the game, like the exact story, but they feel like they're still a part of the world and something that you still have yet to uncover.
yeah, I mean, one of them, which is probably one of the easiest bosses in the game, is the in Green Path, where you come across the big shrub,
Oh, the massive charger. I don't remember what it's
massive
called exactly.
charger, yeah.
Is that what it is?
It's a massive moss charger.
Ah, okay,
Yeah.
close.
So, it's a fairly simple boss, found fairly early on in the game. You can just kind of stumble across it, but it really fits. You're in this room with this broken down, almost Coliseum looking area, and the lights shining through, and it's this bush that runs at you over and over. And it's fairly simple to dodge, but it's still an engaging fight. Like, you never really feel like you can just relax. Like, you're still paying attention the whole time. And then, conversely, there is the King Grim,
Oh,
which
Nightmare
is,
King.
yeah, which is a DLC content boss, but it's part of this troupe of characters that are introduced in this DLC. But it's this vampire inspired character, but the design of him is still unique and fits the world of the game. I never looked at it and thought, hey, this is just them doing vampires. this this is just the guy with a cape and bats, and he sucks blood or something. Like, the way they do go about designing the encounter is unique to the game. Like, it fits previous things you've experienced. It fits what you might expect a character or an enemy in this game to do.
Hmm.
And it really doesn't repeat uh, things that have been encountered in other bosses, as far as I can remember. But
Yeah,
I mean, it,
each
it
boss generally
involves,
feels unique, and a lot
yeah,
of that is the atmosphere that they build around it.
I mean, this boss involves bullet hell segments, which is a part of the game, but more so than
Interestingly,
I.
it's the easiest part of the fight.
Yeah.
The true hell is outside the bullet hell.
Yeah, funnily enough, I want to talk about Nightmare King Grim because that has got to be probably my favorite fight after beating it, of course, in the entire game because it really, like, one, it was a cool fight. The music was great. The presentation was amazing, but it is really hard. And you have to, like, it's not a boss. Well, I don't know. You're probably not going to beat it in your first 3 tries. And I felt like coming back constantly and practicing because I think it only has 5 moves, but it's a lot faster than its original state of just regular Grim. And when you beat it, you get this, or even while you're beating it, you get this unbelievable sense of success by dodging its attacks. Because you, like, when you first get in there, that thing will kill you in like 5 seconds, right? And then you'll
Yeah.
last a minute, and then you'll last 2 minutes or however long, and then you'll beat it. And it's like that progression from feeling like you have no chance at all to beating it is like it's euphoric. It's so incredible.
Yeah, that's what it's all about with these kinds of games, I think. And I think that that really encapsulates what's fun about the boss fights in not just this game, but in Dark Souls and Cuphead and games with difficult bosses. Often the fun part is as you describe, starting out with no chance and then kind of working your way up. And I think this game does that really well too.
Well, I think we should also talk about the fact that this game, once you beat it the first time, unlocks the Steel Soul option.
Ha.
So, in a way, they do expect you, once you've beaten it, if you choose to take this challenge, basically, to beat all of these on your first try,
Well,
which
Without
certainly you have
is
to
dying.
have beaten
insane.
the game. Well, you have to have beaten the game to unlock it. So certainly,
I mean, I could say
there.
for a fact that if beating the game and then going back to play that, I would still die constantly. Like, there's no way that just playing through once gives you the skills to inherently just breeze through all these encounters.
Well, certainly not. And I mean, it is definitely a challenge mode, as you say. And that's really, I think, only for the most hardcore people. I started one myself, but I've only gotten maybe 4 hours in.
And
And
you
I
are
have
one of the
no,
most hardcore people, of course.
right, of course, yes. But as I was about to say, I have no delusions that I'll ever actually finish it.
Yeah.
So you're saying you're not going to try and get through Path of Pain.
Yeah, I might skip that one for this lifetime. Well, on that topic of the boss fights and difficulty, I suppose. I mean, do we think that there should be an easy mode in this game?
Well,
That's a tough one because like obviously games like, and I hate bringing it up, but Dark Souls has made a reputation on being very difficult, and there's kind of an allure to that, right? And same with this game is, there's some areas that some gamers are not going to be able to progress through without like exorbitant amounts of effort and time spent in the game. But I think that it's very difficult to try to make an experience that's built for all gamers, which is how I think that games should be laid out, or you end up kind of like watering down what the game is, right? If you talk to your buddy who played on easy and you say, "Oh man, Nightmare King Grim, like that was a fight, like that I felt like I was really tested," and they go, "Oh, like it was okay." What do you mean? Like this is one of the greatest boss battles I've ever encountered, and like if they just breeze through it, it's like it just loses all of the charm and all of the mysticism around it.
hmm. I think in terms of this game in particular, I feel like an easy mode isn't absolutely necessary, I guess. And, I'm not one to take on these challenging games, but I think Hollow Knight does such an effective job in the early game, like ramping things up and like letting the player grow accustomed to it, that even if I gave this to someone who has never played a game in their life, they will still manage to get some hang of it and progress some amount. And then it's kind of up to them whether they're interested enough to sink in some effort to continue to push forward. And the game will continue to slowly build up their skills, sort of naturally instead
Hmm.
of just arbitrarily making something more difficult or less difficult.
I'd like to add something to this game. Like, I don't know if I have the like. I'm sure I have a reputation on this podcast of like being somebody who plays everything on like the hard mode and does everything. But
Yes.
there's parts that like the true end to this game. I know I won't be able to get to. You have to beat the pantheon of Hallownest, where you beat every boss in a row without dying. That's just not. That just isn't something that I think I'm capable of. I'm not able to get to the final ending, but I'm still able to just YouTube the ending, and B still enjoy all the game that I have experienced and experience it through like vicariously through other people actually completing those things.
Absolutely. And I think this game, among many, many others, often the challenge of the game is a big part of what the game is. And, taking that away is effectively taking away part of what makes the experience effective. So I definitely think Hollow Knight would be worse off for an easy mode. But
Well said.
um, the other thing I was wondering about is, obviously you have so much customization with so many different charms to choose from. But I guess my question is, do we feel like, well, I guess I feel like certain charms are maybe too powerful to the point where I never want to take them off. Stuff like the long nail or quick focus or the mark of pride, stuff like that. What do you think?
I think personally, I don't necessarily agree. I think that it's really up to your play style. Like you said, there's people that focus wholly on the energy attacks, and to the people that prefer doing that, they'll never have long nail on, right? Like, so to you, in the way you prefer to play, long nail and quick focus is your strongest option, right? For me, I might also really like long nail, but I could also think, hey, like if a certain encounter is giving me this issue, maybe I should switch it out for something more appropriate. So I never felt personally that I was locked into certain things.
Right.
I like that there's a lot of kind of hidden combinations. For example, I can't remember exactly what the combination is, but it turns your vengeful spirit into you shoot out a fluke marm
Yeah, you
that'll
shoot at
attack.
worms. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll
Hmm.
attack enemies. But you can shoot at a whole fluke marm.
Yeah, and there's also one with the charm you get from the dung defender, where it's
Oh,
sort of,
the stinky one, Defender's Crest.
yeah, so it's like it'll emit this scent. um but if you combo it with the spore charm that makes you emit spores while you're healing, it will create a large cloud or a bigger cloud that does double damage. So there are
Yeah.
these kind of hidden combos in these charms.
So I think both of those things that you guys just mentioned, or both those combos, are really interesting. But like I said, for me, it was like I would just never even consider it because it was like, well, now I
But
gotta
that's the
ditch
thing,
my
right?
my long nail, and it's like,
That was your preferred playstyle. So I think that there are still valid other ways to do it. Like I don't personally think that long nail and quick focus are like you need to have those in your playthrough or else you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Well, there are some bosses that on like Shaman and Soul Catcher in order to blast them down with Vengeful Spirit or Soul Shaded is I think the name of the upgraded one. But it also kind of comes down to like how good you are at the game, right? Like if you don't need like the different ones and you can if like say you're good enough at dodging attacks and getting hits in that you don't need to amplify that, then you can afford to put in different charms. And I mean, when you get to the end of the game, I feel like you just have to put on all the nail boosting charms, but that's at the end of the game, right? And those are for like the hardest boss in the game. And I think that's fine. But like for the majority of the
right?
game, you're kind of free to put on whatever you like.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, no, I think the charm system is fairly well balanced in terms of just allowing a player to use whatever they are interested in using at any time and not feeling like they're uh you know making it worse on themselves by dropping one thing over the other.
And you should try it, but you might be shocked at how much damage your energy attack can do by putting on the correct charms. It's
Hmm.
totally viable.
Yeah, 'cause I never used
Yeah, well, maybe worth some experimentation there then.
it. Hmm.
Do you want to? I guess we can kind of move on to our closing thoughts if you want to start with that, Cam.
Sure. So I guess in totality, it's no secret because I've hardly said a negative thing about the game the entire time. I really love this game. I really love how tight the controls feel. That's a big part of it to me. The ease of moving around in the game, the atmosphere the game creates, the music, the soundscape is so good. But also, I think the part I enjoy the most about this game is all the little details. And some of them are very missable. But for example, just two quick ones. If you collect all the grubs and return them to the grub father eats them all.
What?
Whoa, whoa, what?
What?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
eats them all. And he's
So you're
just like,
basically just getting him a
he's lying
snack.
on
You're
the
going on
floor,
a
he's
snack
fat as
run.
fuck. And you could just like bounce on his tummy. Another one is if you get all the nail upgrades, the nailsmith loses purpose in life, and like he asks you to end his life, But if you don't and you just move on, you can find him doing arts and crafts with Paint Master Shio on the other side of the map. It's like there's so many
Or
like
the banker.
or the banker where if
Oh,
you
tell me
give
about the
them
banker.
okay, so the bank wait, don't?
No, dude, I don't know what
Okay,
happens
so
to
the
her.
banker, Maribel that you can find is like, oh, okay, so this is obviously a mechanic where if I feel like I'm dying a lot and I'm going into a dangerous area and I might not be able to recover my shade and get my money back, I can save some money, put it with Maribel. I did that. I put 25 grand, the max money you can put in there, and left. Came back, she's gone. You hit her, you show up, her storefront falls down. It's made of cardboard. You and then later on, you can find her in the City of Tears chilling in a hot spring, and you beat the shit out of her and get all your money back.
Oh, wow.
It's just
Damn.
there's a ton of little interactions like that that are just oozing with personality that really make this game just an absolute delight to play.
Yeah, so basically what Cam said. Um it's it
Yeah,
no,
yeah, what he said.
it's a really good game. I enjoyed it more than I expected to originally. I wish I had gotten into it sooner. I think that there really isn't much I would change about the game from, the world design, layout, art, music, combat, traversal, uh, lore. I, there's not one moment where I felt disappointed in it. Frustrated constantly from combat, but that's, my own issue, I guess. um,
No, it's not like I didn't ever get frustrated.
yeah,
That's just
but
part of the game.
yeah, I think especially for the scale of the team that this came out of, I would not ask for any more. I mean, they're already coming out with a sequel based on content they were originally just going to make it a DLC, but I think it expanded significantly and they just switched it up. But I'm already looking forward to that.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything I can say to praise the game that the two of you haven't said already. But what I will say is that this is the kind of game that makes me feel that we live in really a very blessed time for video games. A
Yeah.
time where a lot of people who grew up playing games as kids on their Nintendos, their PlayStations, their Xboxes are now old enough and have the resources at their disposal to take the ideas of their predecessors like Metroid, like Castlevania, and build on them and make things that are new and unique and can recreate the same feelings they felt playing those games as kids for the next generation. And I mean, it's hard to imagine now, but surely this game itself will probably inspire a whole new generation of people to go on and create the next genre defining game. And, the cycle will perpetuate.
I
And
can only
anyway,
hope.
Yeah.
yeah, can only hope. Anyway, I think it's a phenomenal game too, and it's absolutely deserving of the heaps of praise it's received from not just ourselves, but many in the gaming landscape.
And if you've made it this far and have not played the game, go play the game.
Yeah, there's still plenty to see that we haven't mentioned. Tons, in fact.
Yeah. That this would have been hours longer if we went over absolutely everything in the game.
Masterpiece. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Game Dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace. Hey folks, this is Perry. Thanks for listening to Game Dive. Make sure to join in on the discussion below and let us know your thoughts on the game, and if you enjoyed the episode, be sure to leave us a like. Game Dive is a monthly podcast, so if you want to hear more from us, you can subscribe or follow to get updated when our next episode airs. See you next time.